What is up, pre-meds? So I just finished filming a video with Josh Korzan, someone who actually just recently got accepted into medical school. This video is going to be full of a ton of information about what it takes to be a successful pre-med student. We're going to be covering a ton of information, so go ahead, feel free to put the video on in the background and just kind of listen to us talk, because there's going to be a lot that we go through. So make sure you take some notes, and we're going to go ahead and jump right into it.
All right. Thanks so much for joining me, Josh. If you want to just go ahead and give a brief introduction to who you are, we can go ahead and just jump into this.
All right, let's do it. Yeah, thanks for having me, man. It's great to be here finally in person, or at least over video. Hey, everyone, thanks for joining. My name is Josh Korzan. I'm an incoming medical student at Rush Medical College in Chicago, and I'll be starting in August. But for the time being, I am a CNA in the emergency department in South Bend, Indiana.
Well, first of all, man, congratulations on getting to medical school. That's like a ginormous achievement right there.
Oh, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot. And congrats to you on matching. That's huge.
Thank you, dude. I appreciate that. It's happening so soon. So I'm like still kind of like, it's kind of surreal for me right now, just kind of actually believing I got through medical school. But yeah, just before we get into the questions, would you be willing just to kind of share a little bit about like, your journey getting into medical school and kind of why you wanted to go to medical school?
Yeah. So out of high school, I actually joined the Marine Corps, and I did that for 4 years. I was in the infantry. And after the 4 years, I knew that I wanted to go back to school to further my education. I didn't really know exactly what I wanted to do at that point, though. So I sort of just fell into a business degree, and along the way, dabbled in just about every subspecialty of business that I could get my hands on. And I was waiting for that moment for something to click where I finally realized, okay, this is what I'm supposed to do with my life. And that moment never really came. So I just honestly felt lost for quite a while there. But once I set out to do something, I like to see it through. So I graduated, and after graduation, got a full-time job in sales out in Los Angeles. And after about 6 months, I couldn't do it anymore. I didn't have any passion for what I was doing. So I had a heart to heart with myself. I decided to move back home, go back to school, and to keep exploring. I have a sister that worked as a nurse in the emergency department here locally, and she recommended scribing to get a viewpoint into the hospital and medicine, because that was something that I was considering. So I got a job as a scribe, and that's when I finally had that moment where it kind of clicked, and I thought, okay, I'm on the right track now. And then once the pandemic hit, they actually terminated the scribe program,
Oh,
and I
wow.
was left without a job for about 3 months, maybe. But I just was essentially trying to claw my way back into the hospital at that point. And there was an ICU tech job, a CNA job that opened up. So I finally obtained that position. And then that's the position that actually confirmed my decision to pursue medical school, because, as a scribe, it's a great job because you get to see the thought process of the doctors. You're following them around, typing everything out, and it's great. But you actually don't get a lot of patient interaction. So when I got to the ICU working as a CNA, that's when I got the one-on-one patient time, and I just love it so much. So that's the one thing that finally did confirm my decision to be a doctor.
Dude, that's awesome.
Yeah.
It's actually kind of interesting because we both kind of have a similar background. Before I was wanting to go to medical school, I was actually studying international business myself. So it's kind of cool that we have this, similar background. And actually, I had someone once ask me, was it difficult to like transition from like business to like pre-med? Because pre-med's very like science based, and it's very, you have like your chemistry, your biology, and like for the most part, as a business major, you don't do like any of that stuff. Did you kind of find that transition a little difficult, or how was that?
So I really didn't find it difficult, to be honest, because those are the types of things that I was reading about in my spare time. Leisure
Mm.
reading was all medicine or health related. I'm kind of a fitness freak to some degree. So those are the things I was already doing in my free time, and the business was extremely boring to me. So switching over was actually a really good thing for me, and I found it way more engaging, and I really did enjoy it. Um, the one thing that I would say is that the science classes were a lot harder. So
Yeah, they are kind of hard.
yeah, yeah. Um, Especially organic chemistry for me personally. I know it's the bane of the existence for a lot of pre-meds, and it was for me as well. Great class, just very, very challenging.
Oh yeah, Orgo is definitely one of those classes. It's like you're either in like I love Orgo camp or you're in like the I hate Orgo camp. For me, I did like it. It was mostly because like I like to draw out the little mechanisms and stuff. I found that to be fun, like drawing like the arrows and things like that. But actually, it's an interesting point that you bring up because like the chemistry classes, physics, biology, all that stuff, it's like it actually is. I feel like harder than the business classes, but it's also more interesting too. And like something that I found was like even though it's quote unquote harder, because like it's more interesting and more engaging, it in turn kind of becomes easier. Did you kind of feel like the same way too about that?
I did. Yeah. Yeah. I'll put in as much effort as I can for something that I'm passionate about. And that is much more true for me in the medical field and the sciences than it was in business. So absolutely.
Yeah, absolutely. And kind of going to the next point, something kind of related is like mindset. And for me, like as a pre-med, I found that mindset was like one of just the most important things to be successful as a pre-med student. And in the same way that you found that you were able to like study more for the classes like biology and chemistry and stuff because they were more engaging to you, I feel like that's kind of like the mindset. As a pre-med student, I made myself like find reasons I enjoyed each class. I was like, okay, why am I like looking forward to like learning general chemistry? Why am I looking forward to biology? And because like I kind of told myself that to do that, like I was actually able to study a lot harder and be like a lot more focused in those classes. Um, did you have like any sort of like mindsets as a pre med that helped you to be successful?
Yeah, I think maintaining consistency with your schedule and timing of everything is one. So, time management is huge, obviously, because you're going to be very busy, especially if you're working on the side as well. So, just being disciplined with your time management was a big thing for me, and I think is for a lot of pre meds. And then having a growth mindset, knowing that you're going to fail along the way, but to utilize those failures as an opportunity to learn and to grow, I think is also huge. Um, I probably should give credit to the Marine Corps for helping me to build some of that discipline because you know, after some of the things you go through in that respect, it just gives you perspective, right? So some of these things that a lot of people that are younger going through college find to be very difficult and stressful, it's just not that stressful compared to other life experiences that I've gone through. So I
Oh,
think I am
absolutely.
very thankful to have had those experiences to help me along the way as well.
And honestly, I feel like this is kind of a great like proof to the idea that you don't have to like come from like a science background to be successful as a pre-med. Really, the thing that's most important as a pre-med, at least in my opinion, is the mindset. Like I really do think that if you come in with like a good mentality that you want to be successful, you're not going to let any hardship stop you. You're not going to let any hurdle kind of like get in the way of it. I feel like you're going to be way more successful than even someone who's like, naturally more gifted at science classes and things like that. I really believe that like mentality is like probably the most important thing as a pre-med student. And I think like you're kind of a great example of that. You came from a business background, but also you were a Marine too. And if the Marines are anything, it's discipline. And you got into medical school. So I don't know if you kind of agree with that statement, but I think that mentality is just like probably the most important thing that pre-meds need to work on.
Yeah, well, I appreciate that, man. That's really nice of you to say, and I do think it's served me well. So, what's the saying that hard work beats talent when talent doesn't work? And I
Absolutely.
never claim to be the smartest person in the room. In fact, I'm often probably far from that, which also means you're in the right room, right? You want to be surrounded by smart people, but I am often, at least in my opinion, one of the hardest workers in the room. So at least through that mechanism, I can eventually, hopefully, work up to be one of the smartest people, as I can be personally, at least.
I'm sure you're not giving yourself enough credit about that, but I would definitely say, as a med student, that the traits to be successful, in my opinion, it's not really about being quote unquote smart. I think everyone who's a pre med, everyone who's a med student is smart anyway. But the thing that really separates people is hard work. Like, are you willing to just study those extra several hours to guarantee yourself to like get a good grade on that exam? Like, that's the thing that separates like pre meds, in my opinion. I think people who are disciplined, those are the best pre-meds out there.
If nothing else, I'm too stubborn to fail. I just
That's exactly the right mentality. Like I have like perfect faith that you're going to do completely well in med school. And like, people say med school is really hard because like it requires a lot of time. But like, with your background, like anyone who's very disciplined, like they're going to succeed in med school. It's going to be a grind for sure. But, if you come at it with the growth mentality and all those things like that, like it's going to be hard, but you're definitely going to get through it and you're going to learn a lot about yourself during the process as well.
I appreciate that.
So, kind of just, moving on, talking about the mindset as well. Um, how did you kind of go about handling getting like low grades, and like how did you mentally, I guess, bounce back from any setbacks you had as a pre-med student?
Yeah, great question. So to be honest, I really didn't struggle with low grades as a pre-med because at that point I had already gone through 3 years of undergrad through the business stuff.
Mhm.
And again, before that, the Marine Corps just kind of gave me the right mindset going through. On a side note, if I had gone to college straight out of high school, I probably would have done nowhere near as well. Um, However, in the undergrad business time that I was in, I did get 1C, and just it kills me to even say that. I hate it. Um, so I was contemplating doubling up with a science major when I was doing my business degree, and we didn't need um, calculus, like proper calculus, through the business degree. I think we worked up all the way to um, pre-calc, maybe maybe calc 1, but it was calculus 1 without any trigonometry. It was like calculus for business or whatever their version of it is. And
Mhm.
so I hadn't taken real calculus and I hadn't taken any trigonometry. And so when I decided to pick up that science major, I think it was biology at the time that I decided to pick up, I had to do Calc 1 and 2, and they put me straight into it without looking at any of my prereqs, apparently. So I had no trigonometry experience going into this class. And this was a 5 credit calc class, right?
Oh wow.
And so the first day, we're sitting at our desks, and the professor's passing out these review sheets, and he's saying, "This is everything that you should already know." And it's all trigonometry. I have no idea what I'm looking at this point, but I'm too stubborn to say anything, just to say, hey, I should probably not be in this class and I should come back and take it when I'm actually prepared. I didn't
Right.
do that. I just, put my nose to the grindstone and just went after it. I think I slid by with a B in Calc 1, but because it just compounded, I was trying to teach myself trig while trying to learn calc, and it just
That's
didn't
really
go well.
impressive still.
Well, I appreciate that. But by the time we got to the second semester, it just wasn't going very well.
Mhm.
And I ended up with a C in that class. So, that did tank my GPA a little bit, bruised the ego a little bit more. But I'm thankful in that was really the only misstep that I had.
Okay. So it looks like you took it pretty well then. Is I guess sometimes a little bit of humility as a student too is a good thing because it kind of pushes you to like work even harder at your next classes and stuff too. And I guess like one thing I will say, so I made a few grades lower than I expected as well. And at first it ate me up inside a bit because I'm like, I'm not going to ever get into medical school. Like, how am I going to get into medical school if I made a C or a B in this class or something like that. But honestly, so many people like make B's and C's and stuff and get into medical school all the time. I think that as pre-med students, people who want to get into medical school, there's so much pressure because of like things like social media, everyone like people have 4.0 GPAs on there and stuff. And it's like you're comparing yourself to all these people, but there's so many people who get in that you don't know about who have like lower GPAs and things like that. So I think it's sometimes just nice to know it's like, hey, 1, 2 bad grades is definitely not going to stop you from getting into medical school because like probably like 90% of the people who apply to med school do have like, a couple bad grades here and there. So just kind of take that pressure off yourself. I think that you have enough pressure as a pre-med student, so just taking that off your shoulders will definitely be good for you in the long haul.
Yeah, I think that's a big point to bring up, actually, because like you're saying, in the pre-med community, among students and then advisors and then the companies and YouTube channels and everything that's out there, there is a lot of fear surrounding the possibility of getting low grades or a low MCAT. And so just, yeah, to everyone who's watching, just know that you can still get in with missteps like that. Like, I have a C on my transcript and the application process still went very well. So you can have things like that. More so, I think what a lot of schools are looking for is how you respond to that and how you grow from it. So if you continue to get low grades after that, that's one thing. But if they see one dip and then this just giant upward trend, that okay, they took this lesson, they learned from it, and then they got better, I think you'll be totally fine.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, medical schools definitely really value like that trend, like you're saying. Like if you have a few bad spots here and there, it's like it's understandable. Everyone does, we're all people. Med schools just want to see the overall, like what's the overall package that we're getting as an applicant. And that package is also more than just the GPA too. Like, as long as your GPA is not like completely terrible, like, like under a 3 or something like that, like, you still have a fighting chance, especially if you have like clinical experience, if you've done like research, you have all these other aspects to your application too. Those things are all weighted very highly. So I know like we all talk about GPA and MCAT as being like the end all be all as a pre-med student, but really, I mean, your extracurriculars are a huge component of the application as well. And this is something I try to tell pre-meds all the time is like, you have to care about that aspect just as much as you do the GPA and MCAT. Because I've seen people who have like incredible GPAs, but they don't have like any clinical experience, no shadowing or anything, and then they just get waitlisted or they don't get into medical school because of that. So I think, just do your best for the classes that you can, but also don't neglect like the other aspects of your application. I think that would be kind of my advice about that.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And actually, to piggyback off of that point, aside from putting a huge emphasis on your activities, I think also the way that you frame your application is huge. And this is one thing that I've talked about a little bit before is that you don't want to necessarily frame it like a job application, right? You want to try to tell a story. For one, I think your personal statement should really be telling the story of why you want to be a doctor and sort of how you got to that point. Um, but I feel like the default, because, working through college, applying to jobs, a lot of people in the typical job application or resume rather, you don't want to format it like a resume, like, okay, worked at the hospital as a CNA or a nurse assistant, and then you have it in the description. What did you do? Assisted the nurses, and it's like, yeah, no kidding.
Right.
The people looking at your application are going to know typically what those job descriptions are. What's more powerful, I think, is actually using a story of a patient interaction that you had, for example.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point because, the way you frame things to medical schools is actually super important. If you can talk about how each experience helped shape you towards becoming a doctor and how it just like reconfirmed that you wanted to be a doctor, that like gives them a very genuine reason to believe that you want to go to medical school, right? If you're like, oh, this experience that I had as a CNA or, as a tech or whatever you were in the hospital was like I saw this patient interaction and it's just like I really wanted to be able to like help them and like diagnose it or something. And like just I saw how the doctors handled it and I was just very, impressed with it. Things like that really speak volume to like why you want to do this. And med schools have like a good understanding of like, oh, this person wants to do this for like, real reasons. Like they have genuine reasons they want to go to med school. Like that makes you a lot more of an appealing applicant because actually a lot of applicants sometimes will have like these cookie cutter answers for like, oh, I want to be a doctor because I want to help people. And I'm like, yes, that's great. You should want to help people. And I actually made a video about this, and a lot of the comments were like, what's wrong with wanting to help people and wanting to be a doctor? And I'm like, that's not the problem. You should want to help people to be a doctor. But the thing is, med schools know that everyone applying wants to help people to be a doctor. So you're not gonna stand out from the crowd by saying I want to like save lives and be a doctor. What you got to do is give them a specific reason why. Like, what is it specifically about being a doctor? Because you can still help save lives as a PA. You can still help save lives as an NP. As a nurse. Like, there's so many fields of medicine where you get to help people. So they want to know like why doctor? Why not a PA? Why not this? Right? So I think that like giving specifics like about your story and framing it in a way where like your experience like in the hospital helped like shape your decision to go to med school over going into like PA or something very specific about what it means to be a doctor. If your personal statement can kind of hit on that and like your activities and the way you frame it, like you said,
Hmm.
that will make you a really strong applicant if you can do those things.
So, do you have like an elevator pitch for why you wanted to be a doctor and how you communicated that to schools?
So for me, I mean, so my background, I guess, like pursuing med school and stuff in general was quite different than most pre-meds anyway, because like I said, I was doing like international business. And
Mhm.
actually before I wanted to go to med school. So I lived in Tokyo for a year, and then I also lived in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. And so my experience is very unique in that sense. And I do think that like uniqueness and novelty can play a role if you use it correctly. I mean, I'd say for me, my application was pretty well rounded anyway. Like I made sure to have like extracurriculars, research. The way I kind of looked at my application was like I didn't want to have like any single thing they could point out and be like, oh, like why didn't you do this or do that? So like my goal as a pre-med student was just to make sure it's like everything is like in place. So like I have everything and I've done all of that. And obviously try to get a good GPA and MCAT. But for me, my background, coming from, living in like different countries and stuff, and then wanting to go to med school, that was pretty unique. And I kind of emphasized that, my personal statement. Because when I realized I wanted to go into medicine and, pursue med school, was actually when I was in Vietnam. And at the time, it was my ex fiance. Her dad was diagnosed with leukemia. And I remember being there and just kind of seeing how like the family was really like in shock and just didn't know how to process what's going on, and they felt very scared and alone. They thought like he's going to die and things like that. And I just remember, seeing my fiance at the time and how it impacted her and her family. And I was kind of like, I felt like I wish I could do something to help here, but I have nothing to offer. I don't know anything about medicine. I don't know anything like this. And it was just kind of like an aha moment for me where I was like, oh, like, yeah, I wish I could help people, be, I guess, like a beacon of light in moments of darkness for people. And it kind of started the whole process for me. Also being to really see a lot of like how healthcare disparities are in like rural areas, and just how like so many people like they don't see dentists, they don't see doctors and stuff. Like, it's it's kind of eye opening. And that was a big part for me. Obviously, not everyone who's applying to med school is going to have a similar experience. But what I can say is, try to find the things about you that you can talk about that makes you, unique. Like, did you like grow up and like one of like your uncles or aunts, do they have some medical conditions or things like that that impacted your all's ability to go on vacations, things like that? Anything really like that actually impacted you growing up, talk about that. Like also like for me, my uncle, he was actually mentally challenged. So, and I actually spent a lot of time, like whenever we hung out, like we had to take care of him, make sure like, he's not going to go off, like, walk off or do something strange. So, for me, I really valued, the connection with him. And I also mentioned that as well as my application. Um, so kind of make the long story short, try to find the things that happen to you in your life and talk about how that kind of pushed you towards this path of being a doctor. If you have like genuine reasons like that, it's really going to like be good. And definitely don't feel afraid to use those reasons, because these are what make you who you are and what makes your journey your journey. Sorry if I kind of rambled on there for a while.
No, that's a great answer, and I actually really enjoyed learning more about what brought you here. So thanks.
So let's go ahead. We'll move on to the next question, and that is, we'll just talk a little bit about having a game plan as a pre-med student. So for me, having a game plan was like really essential to being successful. Did you have like any general strategy for how you wanted to use your undergrad years? Like, did you do anything specific during first, second, third, or fourth year, or like, did you have a strategy kind of throughout the process?
Yeah. So when I was still in Los Angeles working in the sales job, I contacted the pre-med advisor for the school that I would be going back to. And she gave me the layout of the classes that I would need. So from a strategy standpoint, I at least knew the timeline of everything at that point. And then I mean, when I dive into something, I go full fledged. And so I was watching every video, listening to every podcast, reading every book that I could get my hands on to learn how to do this properly. And one of the big things that I stumbled across was just the emphasis that you should place on clinical experience. So that's why the scribe thing popped up, and I did that. And as soon as, that program got terminated, that's why I wanted to get into another clinical position. And so accumulating that clinical experience, I think, is huge, because it not only gives you the experience that you need, but it also is allowing you to tell the story that medical schools need to hear. Because if you don't work in a clinical setting, they don't know that you actually know anything about medicine or how it actually works. Like, If you have none of that experience, they don't know that you actually want to be a doctor. You know, you could have all of the the classroom smarts and experience in the science courses, and at that point maybe you might make a better researcher. You might make a great doctor, but the big thing is there that you don't know and neither do they. So getting clinical experience, to shorten the answer for you, was a huge part of my strategy.
That's actually a really, really good point. And it's like I said, I was saying a little bit earlier, kind of like, hinting at it, was like the extracurriculars are just so important, as a pre-med student. Like I know someone who was like they went to Emory, and which is a pretty big name school from where I'm from, and they had like nearly a 4.0 GPA, and I think they got like five, like I don't know how high on the MCAT, but they got like pretty good score on the MCAT. But they didn't, like I said, they weren't having any extracurricular work, and they got like maybe waitlisted at like a school or two, but like they didn't get like any acceptances or anything like that. And it just like kind of blows your mind. It's like, how can you have such a good GPA and stuff? But it's exactly what you're saying, is that extracurricular work is so important, like especially in the clinical sense, because they don't know if you know what you're getting yourself into. Like medical school, basically, if you were to put yourself into the mind of the people accepting, applicants, right? The committee who's like, looking through applications, what they're really looking for is someone like that they know will be successful in med school. So like that means obviously you have to handle the academic rigors of things, but you also have to know what you're getting yourself into, because the whole journey to becoming a doctor is a very, very long, long journey. It's not an easy one either. So they want people who know will kind of see it through. And the only way they can know that is if you've actually seen what doctors do, and kind of they know that you know what you're getting yourself into. Um, so honestly, I feel like someone who has a lot of clinical experience, like they were a nurse for a long time, or like, they spent a lot of time in the hospital, that's someone who's probably more competitive than just someone who only has like, a really good grade average. At least that's like, from what I've seen with, fellow pre-meds and my classmates and stuff.
Yeah, I agree. I think you could probably have a perfect GPA and a perfect MCAT score, but if you have no clinical experience, I mean, sure, you might get into one school and get lucky, but by and large, I think you're not going to get accepted. And,
Yeah.
and I've
So
heard stories like that too. Yeah.
yeah, like it's really about being a complete package. Like that is the thing I try to tell people all the time, because I have people who'll message me and ask me like, advice on their application and stuff. And I'll be like, well, where is like, have you shadowed? And it's like, no, I haven't shadowed. It's like, okay, well, that's like your biggest priority then, because if you haven't shadowed, it's, they're going to ask you, even if your grades are great, let's say you get an interview and they're like, tell us about, your favorite things in the hospital. And you're like, I haven't been to the hospital. That's, that's not going to go very well, probably. So I think that, using your time as a pre-med well, like for me, like, I wanted to have a game strategy, like going into being a pre-med. So I wanted to make sure I could get shadowing in and get like, clinical experience and stuff in. So like from like year one, year two, I was already like trying to like find people I can shadow and like, get into the hospital and stuff like that. And I think that like starting early is your best choice. Make sure you start as soon as you can looking for these things, because you don't know how busy you're going to end up being later on in the process as well. Because like once the MCAT starts rolling around and stuff, you might want to put more time into the MCAT instead of having to now like kind of force yourself to find all these opportunities last minute.
Hmm.
So that's where I feel like preparation is just like a really big aspect of being successful as a pre-med student. So yeah, definitely try and like plan out your pre-med years to an extent. Expect the MCAT to be a beast, because it is a beast, and expect that you're going to have to put in some time studying for it, and really, maybe putting a little bit more time into studying for it than you originally, thought. Um, yeah, you need to prepare to be successful. And that's kind of moving into the next question I have is, something many pre-med students struggle with is juggling all the different requirements necessary to, succeed as a pre-med student. How did you, I guess, like, juggle studying for classes and, doing everything else you have to do?
Yeah, that's a tough question. So I, I might be wrong here, but at least what I believe I was given as far as my schedule wise, because I wanted to accelerate it as much as I could. I was excited to get this whole journey started, and I didn't want to prolong it an extra year just to take one more class. So that pre-med advisor, when I reached out, she sort of compacted it into, what turned out to be 2 years, I think. And for that reason, the course load was fairly heavy. But again, a lot of it's perspective. And at this point, I was already a little older than the traditional college student. So I think my time management skills were maybe a little better at that point. Um, and really, it just really wasn't that bad, to be honest. I did take these classes. I did work anywhere from 20 plus hours a week, and it was totally fine. It was very challenging. I'm not, I won't lie about that. Um, but I think it's definitely obtainable. And then studying for the MCAT, that was probably the hardest part of the schedule, because now you had classes, work, and studying for the MCAT. And I did have to throw a little extra effort into that, because I did not, at that point, I had not taken biochemistry. And if I wanted to take biochem before the MCAT, I would have had to take a gap year, and I didn't want to take a gap year. So I did have to kind of try to teach myself a lot of that before taking it. And obviously I still did okay on the test itself. But as an aside, I wouldn't recommend doing that. If you guys can take all the necessary prereqs before taking the MCAT, please do.
So yeah, you kind of hinted at it. I'm sure that being in the Marines and stuff like that helped your time management skills and stuff like that. Is there any tips that you have? Anything you learned? I guess you can bring back to the civilians. On time management and discipline.
Well, in the Marine Corps, they kind of make it easy, because, if you're not where you're supposed to be, then you just get hazed. So
That's fair.
I wouldn't really recommend that in the civilian world, but there is a certain degree of fear in the Corps of just not getting yelled at all the time. And then after enough of that, you just come to make it part of your life. And are you familiar with Jocko Willink?
I am. Yeah.
Yeah, so Navy SEAL, right? And one of his phrases that he uses all the time is discipline equals freedom, right? So if you can have the discipline to do the things that you need to do, just get them done instead of dragging it out, you'll have freedom on the back end to live your life the way you want to. So I think if you're able to do that, it'll be much smoother in the long haul. And I do realize that for everybody that doesn't have a drill instructor or platoon commander yelling in their face, one way to probably go about this is to start small and build up from there. This is similar when I'm trying to get somebody on an exercise routine, because that's something that I've done in the past, is coaching. I wouldn't take somebody from not working out at all. I wouldn't take a couch potato and have them working out for 2 hours a day, 7 days a week. I might have them do like 30 minutes a couple days a week at most, and then build it up over time. So if you're trying to build good habits with studying and things like that, just start small to what you can manage and what you will actually do, and then build it up from there.
Okay, that's a really good way of looking at it. I think that for me too, like when I'm trying to start a new habit in my life, if I start gung ho, I'm like I'm gonna go super hard into it, I'm gonna burn out. Sure, I might be successful at first, but then that is kind of for me, it's something I will burn out at maybe 2-3 weeks into, because it's just so hard to manage that plus everything else. But I feel baby stepping your way into different habits and things like that is one of the best ways to kind of I guess get into the groove of things. Um, as a Marine, did you have to wake up at 5 a.m. or anything like that? Does that kind of contribute to your time management skills?
Yeah, I think it does. If nothing else, I'm maybe practiced in the art of sleep deprivation. So when I get to residency, hopefully I won't die. You can tell me all about
Please give me some tips.
that. Yeah, yeah. But with the burnout thing that you were just mentioning, I think that's important too. So one of the things that I like to say is discipline over motivation. And you can run into this issue if you start on something new and you just go full force 110% from nothing, right? And it may work out fine for a couple weeks, but eventually you're going to burn out and fall off the wagon, right?
Right.
Because when that motivation that you had in the beginning just goes away, you don't have that foundation of discipline to fall back on. Motivation's great when you have it, but it's not always going to be there. So I think by starting off small, like we were talking about, you build that foundation of discipline so that it's there. You do the thing you need to do, and then those motivation peaks will come and go, but at that point you have the confidence to know that you can still carry on.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point. And kind of just to translate this back into, for the pre-meds out there, what you could do is, let's say you have to study for the MCAT and you have to like do clinical, like research, and you have to like you want to go shadow. What I would suggest is, like let's say you're studying for classes already, you want to add the MCAT on. I'd say just start off like, a little bit here and there, like maybe just do like a few practice problems, like do like 10, 20 practice problems, and like that's it. You don't have to do like 2, 3 blocks like right away. Like work your way into this. Start off by going, okay, I'm just gonna do like 10 practice problems, and like work your way into 20 practice problems. And then the same thing with like shadowing. Don't like commit yourself to like way more than you can actually handle. Like it's more important to balance like everything. That's something I've noticed as a med student as well. Is like, you have a million things that you're trying to do. You're trying to study for this, you're trying to like study for step one, you're trying to study for all these different things. But the biggest thing is like you have to find like just consistency is more important. Like you were saying, discipline is more important than motivation. Consistency is super important. So it's just like if you can just at least consistently do 10 practice problems a day, that's better than like doing like 50 practice problems a day, like every couple of days. So like just try and find like just do a little bit, a little bit of the things you have to do. And naturally over time, you're going to be able to add more onto that.
100%.
Okay, so moving on to the next question. This is kind of going back to what we actually just talked about. So it's been said that success is when persistence meets preparation, and I really believe this is something that's actually true. As a pre-med student, was there anything that you did that helped prepare you to be successful as possible?
Yes. So I think it's important to maintain balance so you don't hit that point of burnout. And, you can do anything that you enjoy, right? I obviously think everybody should be doing some form of exercise. If I had my druthers with everything, I would have everybody doing some form of resistance training and cardiorespiratory training. Um, so stress relief, hang out with your friends, maintain your social circles. You work hard, but you also need to have a little R&R as well, so you can maintain your mental health along the way and your general happiness, I think.
Yeah, 100%. Like you don't want to reach the point ever of burnout, because once you do, it takes more effort to like kind of bring yourself back to a normal like lifestyle and like, baseline than if you just like took the time every day to maintain it and never hit that point. Definitely that's something true. That's a skill you're gonna have to develop not only as a pre-med student, but also as a med student, and as a resident, because, your time becomes more and more restricted the further you get into this process anyway. So it's kind of like pre-med is almost like you're preparing yourself to be successful as a med student with what you're doing in pre-med, because med school is like even more intense than being a pre-med, and then like residency is even like more intense than like being a med student. So it's like each step's kind of preparing you for that different aspect. And I guess like for one thing I will say about being like preparation wise as a pre-med student is, definitely make sure that like you are connected to other pre-med students, that you're connected to like pre-med communities. Make sure like, you're checking out like the student doctor network and stuff. You just want to kind of be in touch with like what everyone else is doing. You don't want to compare yourself so much to them, like, oh, my GPA is this and their GPA is that. But it is helpful to have people you can bounce ideas off. So like, if there's a pre-med club at your school, definitely join the pre-med club. I think that would be a great idea, because if you can meet other pre-meds at your school and become friends with them, it's networking. So like they might know some doctors you can shadow. They might know some opportunities that can help you better your application. They can also help you study and give you resources and things like that. So I feel like, one thing that definitely is helpful, and Josh was talking about this earlier, is like, you want to go ahead and study the art of being a pre-med as much as possible. There's tons of resources out there, whether it's on YouTube or Instagram or it's like on all the social media. There's people out there, I guess like us, who put out content to help you all. And the more you can study this and just really make this a second nature, the second nature to yourself, just like an integral part of your life, where you're basically like breathing pre-med at that point. You know exactly, like, when applications are due, you know exactly what's required to get into med school, and you don't have to, like, look it up anymore. Like when you're at that point, then you're like fully prepared and you can just do what you got to do. So I'd say, like, definitely study everything you can about being a pre-med, because that's going to help you be so much more successful.
Yeah, yeah. And it should be a collaborative process too, right? So, like you're saying, reach out to your fellow pre meds, because I feel like in the community, or at least on the internets, there's at least a general thought that it's kind of dog eat dog out there. Like, I
Right.
need to do better than you so I can get that medical school seat and you don't. But that's really not how it should be. And you should be working together to both get accepted to the schools that you want to go to. Um, and then obviously reach out to folks. I think there's a lot of utility in reaching out to folks that are slightly ahead of you in the process. So this is a great example now. Yeah, I'm going to be reaching out to you to ask all about med school. And then when I'm done with med school, like all about residency, right? Because you're just ahead in the process, and you have the most up-to-date information. I
Right.
think, for example, a lot of physicians can provide great insight about this process, but it may not always be current. For example, if there's a physician who's been working in the field for 50 years and you're going to them for advice
Right.
on how to attack the Mcat or your applications, for instance, it's more than likely, if they're not currently active in that process, that you're going to be getting some outdated information, and it's probably changed several times since then. So,
True.
yeah, if I'm applying to residency, you someone like you would be the person that I would reach out to, because you just went through it and obviously you were successful. So those are the types of people that you need to um, get your information from, and obviously scour multiple sources, because there's going to be varying quality between the resources that you come across.
Absolutely. And, like you said, like a lot of people think of this as like a dog eat dog type of world. And to some extent it is that way. Some people are like that, but you'd be surprised. There's a lot of people who are very nice and helpful, and actually helping each other out is the best way to be successful, because more than likely whoever your, pre-med friend is, they're not going to be probably taking like all the, they can only take one spot anyway. So it's like, there's multiple med schools in, like, every single state. So it's like you're not really competing with them. You're competing with everyone. And if you can work together and like help each other out, give each other resources and stuff, you both are more likely to get a spot in medical school. So I really think that as a community, we should just like stop the whole cutthroat mentality. Like, I got to get in, so you can't. It's just it's not helping anyone. It's not helping yourself, because you're basically isolating yourself from other people who have knowledge that you don't. They might know things that you don't. They might know like a resource that like you never heard of that could really be helpful to you, and you might know something that they don't know. So it's just like trade that knowledge, bounce ideas off each other. I mean, literally, as a doctor, that is one of the most important skills you have to have, is the ability to collaborate with people, right? As a doctor, it's a team sport, so if you already have the mentality of it's just me, I got to be the only one who gets in and succeeds, that's not a good sign, like, because as a doctor, you're going to have to talk to nurses, PAs, techs, everyone. You need to know how to do that and be respectful and look out for everyone's interest. So go ahead, develop that skill now. Learn how to, be a good pre-med, and, share with others, and really just make friends with other pre-med students. Like, networking is really big and important. If you're helpful to them, they're going to be helpful to you. And that way everyone kind of succeeds.
Yeah, and coincidentally, teamwork, your ability to work with the team, is something that med schools are likely going to assess in your interviews if you get an interview offer. So building that during your pre-med years is only going to help you, I think.
Yes, absolutely. All right. So moving on to the next question. If you could give just one tip on how to do well in a class, what would it be? Like getting good grades. What is your one tip on that?
One tip.
Yeah,
So
if
I
you had
just
to, if
had
you had
like
to just pick one thing you tell someone.
I just had like 30 go through my mind.
You can give more if you want.
There's Oh yeah, that's well, if study tip wise, spaced repetition and active learning are huge, but if we remove those things, I think one of the biggest things too, bringing it back to this whole collaboration thing, is teamwork. And leaning on your classmates when you have to and letting them do the same to you. You're going to meet people with different strengths. You may be fantastic in molecular biology, but terrible in organic chemistry. And there may be a classmate that perfectly accents your weaknesses and strengths that you can help each other along the way. So I think building those relationships, working together to be the tide that raises all ships is probably a good bet for a single piece of advice.
Yeah, definitely. And I think also what you're saying about spaced repetition and active learning is actually a really good tip. That's something I realized like probably second year med school is like I need to be doing more of this, and definitely like spaced repetition is so important. Just because you studied something once does not mean you know it. Like you need to you need to hit those subjects again and again and again. It's kind of like the same way with going to the gym, right? You can't just do like a bicep curl like, one day and then be like, all right, where's my Arnold Schwarzenegger arms, You got to go in, you got to put the reps in, you got to do it, you got to do it Monday, you got to do it the next week, you got to keep on, at it. So it's the same thing with learning a class, right? Like with chemistry or biology or anything like that, you'll study a subject and then you'll study another topic and then you'll forget to go back and study that topic. But then when the exam comes around, you're like, oh my God, like the things we learned like 2-3 weeks ago, it's like already kind of like coming out of your memory. So I agree with you that you need to just like space repetition that. You need to go back and keep on studying it again and again, just kind of solidify it in your mind.
Yeah, it's cool. I think I stumbled upon the forgetting curve maybe when I first went back for my pre-med work. And, I don't know how the direction on this is going to look, but basically you study a concept. So over time, after you study it, you start to forget it as it trends downward, and then you study it again. So you know it basically 100%, and then it starts to decay again, but a slightly less of a sharp slope,
Right.
right? And then again, and eventually it just flattens out to where you stop forgetting.
Right.
So by hitting that spaced repetition, I think that's how it's gonna help you learn it, but it's really gonna help you retain it over time.
Yeah, definitely. And then also, like you said, active learning, super important. I don't think that enough students actually do active learning and really know what it means to active learn. Most students are just like, okay, I have an exam. I'm just gonna stare at the PowerPoint slides and hope that like it teaches me it. Or like I'm gonna open this book up and then I'm just gonna go ahead and just flip to the page or I'm gonna reread that sentence like 10 times over because I'm falling asleep. And it's just like, you know, it's more painful too. So it's like if you're studying this way where you're just like looking at slides over and over and over again, you're just flipping through pages on the book and that's it. You're gonna not only learn less because you're not engaging your brain properly, like your brain learns better if you're actually stimulating it. And it's not very stimulating to just stare at a blank, like a screen or a page. And not only that, but staring at a page is boring. You're gonna hate the process of being a pre-med student if all you do is just stare at PowerPoints all day. So actually take the time to pull out an iPad if you have an iPad or something or a piece of paper and like write your own notes down as you're reading. If you can, like you can highlight things, underline things. For me, like with biochemistry specifically, I found that drawing the pathways out was one of the best ways to actually learn this. And I would like go to a whiteboard, at least so for med school, we had to learn all the biochemistry pathways during first year. And I was struggling. I'm like, oh my God, what's this enzyme? What does it do? Blah, blah, blah. And what I did was we had these whiteboards in the study areas. And I literally was like, okay, I'm going to keep drawing this until I can draw this from memory. So I saw like on Google, I looked it up and then I copied it and I drew it. And I was like, okay, let me try doing it from memory. And I did it like so many times. I drew that pathway so many times. I literally drew it into my brain almost. And once I did that, I could just see it like on the exam. I'm like, oh, easily, like this is like, where this is in the Krebs cycle or where this is in like, in the electron transport chain or whatever. And that would have not been possible if I just stared at the pathway on like a picture from Google. If I just stared at it for like 10 hours, I probably would have like maybe known like a couple of the enzymes. But by drawing it out, like I had it like the back of my hand. So just, take the time to be creative with the way you study. Because when you study in a creative way, your brain will remember it. So I guess that's kind of my take on that. But Active studying is super, super duper important.
Yeah, I agree on the drawing too. So that was a huge thing on my preparation for at least the biochem portion of the MCAT, because again, I had not taken biochemistry. So what I did was essentially pull up all these pathways, and I learned how to draw all of them just from memory. That and all of the amino acids, which was very helpful. It would have been way more helpful to have taken the class, because obviously I would have had a better understanding of what all of that was, but at least I could draw the pathways. So if it asks a question, how many molecules of ATP are produced from this step in the Krebs cycle, I could answer it because I had drawn it, 100 times probably. Um, Sorry, go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I guess like it's actually even more impressive that you're able to do the biochemistry part on the MCAT without like taking the class beforehand. So anything that Josh is saying right now is super high yield. The way he learned this is like how you're gonna learn this like the best. So whatever he's saying, I definitely take that then.
Well, I appreciate that. Take that with a grain of salt, maybe, because I only got a 503, but without biochem, I'll take that.
Yeah, I mean, biochem is a hard class. In fact, biochemistry was my major as an undergrad. So, the fact that you're able to do the biochemistry on the MCAT without like taking the class and just by like self teaching it to yourself like that, I think is pretty impressive.
I appreciate that. And it was funny because I would tell my professor every single class period, there not a single day went by where we were going over something and I didn't say in my head, like, this would have been really nice to know for the MCAT. And
Right.
and it turned out to be my favorite class in all of undergrad. I loved biochem.
Yeah, biochem is it's a hard class, but it's also, if you kind of embrace the insanity of it, it's kind of fun. So
Yeah. Yeah. And one more thing I wanted to say on studying too. I got this from an Ali Abdal video at one point, but he was saying that it's so much more useful as far as active learning to try to pull information out of your brain than it is to stuff it in. So obviously you have to get it in there somehow. So after your initial review and you get the information at least loosely held in your brain, you want to try to quiz yourself and things like that to try to pull it out, because the active recall process is what really is going to help strengthen those connections and help you retain that information too.
yeah, that's actually a really good point. Like teaching other people is one of the best ways to learn yourself. And actually, that was something I did as a pre-med student. Was I was a tutor, so actually, I didn't really think about it that way, but that probably helped me a lot for the MCAT and studying, because like I had to like teach the concept to like whoever I was tutoring to, and you definitely learn a lot by like teaching others and quizzing yourself. And make sure that whenever you do a study session, so say you're studying chemistry or whatever, and you have this topic that you're going through, when you finish it, you must quiz yourself on it. Like you have to. Like for me, especially in medical school too, because like we'll go through so many different topics, and you're gonna forget stuff. But the best way to solidify that knowledge is to like quiz yourself and like make sure you're getting it all right. And if you're not, then like like, hey, I still got some more work to do. Like quizzing yourself is probably the most important thing to do, because it's like your way to gauge where you're at. Like as a pre-med student, my mentality going into a test was like, I'm not going into this test unless I know for a fact that I'm going to make an A on it. And I was that confident in almost every test that I went into, because I knew I put the preparation in beforehand. I was like, if I know what's going to be on the test. It's fair game. They're like, these are the topics that are being tested on. So I was like, as long as I can do practice questions for everything on here, and I feel confident that I can answer these questions, I have no reason to not ace this exam. So, it's kind of it's a mentality thing. Going back to the very beginning, mentality is the most important part of being a pre-med student. My mentality was, I'm going to guarantee my success as a pre-med student. I'm not going to let this go to chance. I'm going to do whatever it takes. If I have to study an extra 5 hours to make sure I know every single concept on this test, I will do that. And when I walk into exam day, there's no surprises for me because I've prepared for every possible situation. If you go in with that mentality, I guarantee you, you're gonna ace whatever exam you have. And it's only possible if you quiz yourself on all these things beforehand. Because if you just read it and go, okay, I read that and I hope I'm going to do well in the exam, you're leaving that to chance. You need to go in there and be like, I've done the practice problems. I'm literally just going to, it's basically like practice again. You practice it enough times, when you go in for the real thing, it just feels like another practice session for you. So that is probably one of my biggest tips actually for doing well in exams is make sure you're fully ready for that exam, and you know that with the quizzes.
Absolutely. My personal example with that would be from biochem actually. So the professor, he would give us the PowerPoint slides and we could print them out or download them on our computer, and the test information was almost exclusively from those. I mean, it's obviously very complex stuff that you're going over, but if you had a familiar if you had a good understanding of what was on those slides, you would do very well. And so I got to the point with enough review and then, regurgitation of trying to pull this information out of my brain. Basically, I could have taken any one of those PowerPoint slide packets at that point and face down, I could have taught it to you or somebody else. And I think, again, like you were saying, teaching is very helpful. And I lived by myself at the time, so I was just essentially talking to nobody, but still pretending like you're teaching somebody, I thought was very helpful.
Yeah, definitely. Like, you don't even have to actually teach someone if you don't want to. Like if that's too like awkward or uncomfortable for you. It's really just the act of like teaching, or speaking it out loud. Like, we can read a line in a book in our head, but if you can like actually speak it out loud, that actually helps your brain to remember it because like you're speaking using a different part of your brain than just reading and interpreting it. By speaking it out, you're actually solidifying that knowledge. So even if you're not teaching it to someone per se, if you just are pretending to teach it to someone, that is still a really good way to, I guess, memorize and learn the information.
Yeah, and another good point is something that my biochem professor would bring up constantly too is by verbalizing these things, because in science and biochem especially there are a lot of things that are hard to pronounce. So just by getting the repetition in, by saying it out loud, you get to the point of where you're able to say it with confidence, and correctly, but also with confidence.
Okay, let's go ahead and move on to the next question. What was something that was like super hard for you as a pre-med? Was there anything that was very difficult, and how would you have handled it better?
I think the hardest part, so if I can give you two answers, the short answer for me class wise was personally organic chemistry. That was just on a whole nother level for me. It was very challenging. I did fine in it, but a lot of it I didn't really comprehend until I got to biochem because I understood that much better. And I don't know if it was the professor, my biochem professor was fantastic. So like drawing the mechanisms like you were talking about, I could do it, but a lot of it was memorization rather than a real understanding of what was going on. But once I got to biochem, I didn't even really have to memorize it a lot of the time, because if I got a starting molecule and maybe I knew what we were supposed to end up with, I could say in my head, okay, I know what this reaction is and this is how it occurs and this is why it occurs. So I actually learned the underlying process. Um, but during organic chemistry itself, I found it to be very challenging. So, and I think a lot of pre-meds run into that issue. Um, for another answer, one of the most challenging things mentally for me was just feeling like I was almost standing in place or backtracking, because this is my third career here, right?
Mhm.
So I the Marine Corps out of high school, and after that, when I first got in, I was planning on staying in for 20 years, but after a short period of time in, I figured out that's not what I wanted. So then I went back, got the business degree, graduated, started working full time, and then went back again. So by the time I went back to start my pre-med stuff, I was 26. Most students are what, 18? So just that feeling of, you know, I'm not progressing the way that I should. And it's all working toward a goal, obviously. But that's just something that I had to wrap my head around. And I'm totally fine with it now. But, sometimes it just feels like you're standing in place if you're a non-trad student like I am.
Yeah, and I think that that's a really good point too. I'm also, so as a non-traditional student as well. Like when I started medical school, I felt like, oh, I'm a little bit older than the students. I started med school at 25, and most of them are like young, like 22, and there's a maturity difference. And actually, I think something to say for anyone out there who is non-traditional, if you are considering going into medical school or becoming a doctor, and you're changing paths, It's actually totally like normal. A lot of people are doing it. Both of us were in that, that spot. And actually there's some benefits to being someone who's non-traditional as well, because when you do start, like you're more mature, and also like when you switch careers, you're gonna give like 100% to being a pre-med. So it's like you're going to be successful because you have the mentality and you have the life skills that you developed in your other career and the time that you spent before this. So when you do start pre-med, you're just going to kill it. So I think there is some benefits to being non-traditional as well.
Absolutely. So now I 100% see it as a strength, just with all of the life experience and maturity that you accumulate over time that you're talking about. And then also, I think it gives you a much greater conviction that this is actually what you want to do because
Right.
you've tested the waters, right? It's kind of like going to buy a car. If you only see one car on the lot and you buy it, maybe there was one that you would like more. I don't know.
Right.
I think it's important to explore your options to see what you like and what you don't like, because if you're a traditional student, you know, this could be someone else's business, right? Like their business degree. So for
Right.
me, if I could have very easily just stayed in that business job and worked for the rest of my life, but I didn't want to live that way personally in something that I wasn't passionate about. So, you test different things out and you find what you're actually passionate about. So I think being a non-traditional student just gives you the opportunity to actually find that passion and gives you a better idea of if this is something that you actually want for yourself.
Yeah, so just don't see being non-traditional as a weakness. If anything, it is your strength because it makes you unique. It gives you some character. It gives you things to talk about that the traditional students don't always have a chance to talk about. Like you were a Marine before. Like I'm sure like that was something a lot of the interviews and people probably asked you about because that's really cool. Like that gives you character that a lot of people don't have, like the discipline and things like that. So play to your strengths. As a pre-med student, always play to your strengths. Everyone is different. Everyone has something that makes them unique. Maybe you were on like the college swimming team or something, or you were like, a like pro, like, basketball player or something crazy. If there's something about you that's unique, like don't be afraid to hide it because that's what makes you, a unique applicant. And medical schools definitely like people who are unique. I mean, yes, you still need to have a good GPA and MCAT, but play to your strengths. And one last thing I will say is, you're never too old for this process. It is a long process, but you're definitely not too old. There are people much older than you probably applying, for medical school all the time. In my class, there was someone who was 40 years old and had kids. So if they can get into medical school and do this, you can definitely do it too. So don't feel like age is a reason to hold yourself back. If this is what you're passionate about, like go for it. It's your life, and you're going to be an awesome doctor, and you're going to help save people's lives one day. So who cares about if the other classmates are 10 years or 20 years younger than you or whatever? You're doing this for you, and you're doing this because this is what your passion and what your calling is. So never let that kind of hold you back.
Yeah, yeah. And if you don't get done with the training process until you're 40, just think of it like this. You're going to be 40 years old either way. You could be 40 and a doctor or 40 or something else.
Exactly. For me, that was one of the thoughts that helped me kind of deal with the fact that like it took me a couple extra years to figure out that this is what I wanted to do. But it's like, would you rather, like you said, be 40 and a doctor, or 40 and wishing you're a doctor, right?
Mhm.
Two completely different things. So if this is what you want to do, then like go for it and never look back. All right. So moving on to the next question. Was there something that you wish something that you see a lot of pre-meds do or don't do that you're just like, oh, you should do that? Is there anything like you could give advice kind of broadly to pre-med students, like they're doing something wrong or they could do something better?
Try to stay away from the check the box mentality. So with a lot of what the information that's generally put out there, med schools want to see clinical experience, research, various things like that. Don't just do it to check the box. Do it because you're actually interested in it, and also, for instance, if I were working in the hospital and I wanted to get clinical experience working as a CNA, if I did that for maybe 6 months and then cool, I got that experience check, and then I quit and then went and did something else, I think that might be a red flag for med schools. And so try to stay away from that mentality. What else they could do better? Yeah, I don't know, man. I don't know that I have much else. I think we touched on a lot of the really important things.
Yeah, I think that's a good point you made. Kind of just to go on off what you said a little bit, I think that it is important though to have a balanced application. I really do believe that. I do agree with you though. It's like it does look bad if you just do it just to check it off. Um, yes, you do need like clinical experience and stuff to be competitive, in my opinion. But try and find something that you genuinely like. So like, don't just like, oh, this is like the only thing I can get by like, let's say you want to be like a phlebotomist and like draw blood or something, but you just like you hate blood and you hate it. You're not gonna like it. You're gonna burn out. It's just not gonna work well for you. Like, take the time, find something that you actually enjoy, because that way you can actually talk about it during your interviews. You can talk about it on your application. You'll have like memorable experiences, and this also will not only be something you can talk about, but it'll be something that motivates you even more to work harder, because it's like, oh my god, this is so cool, I really want to get in, I'm going to study that much harder and stuff too. So like everything you're doing should like help foster the other aspects as well. The more you do clinical experience, hopefully the more empowered you are to become a doctor, and therefore the harder you study and whatnot, and they can see that passion in you like when you interview with them. So a good point. Do something if it's something you really want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I did actually just think of one more thing. I would also say work on stress management, because a lot of pre-meds or pre-health majors I've seen, at least that aren't non-traditional, so they're maybe a little less mature and they don't have the life experience to compare to know what is really stressful compared to sort of the minute stresses that we encounter on a day to day, right? So there were some stories that I encountered with my classmates where they just had crippling anxiety over a test that we were about to take, and sometimes where they even like didn't show up and had to reschedule it. And sometimes the professor was nice enough to do it. Sometimes they weren't. Um, but again, referring back to this biochem professor, we were getting ready to take an exam one day, and he said something like, "Hey, everyone, just go ahead and take a deep breath. It's just an exam. It's not going to kill you, but stressing about it might." So yeah, pretty powerful quote, I think. And so, pre-meds, work hard, but just relax. It'll be okay.
That was great. And actually, that was the last question. I think that was a pretty powerful note to end it on. Is there any other like kind of closing remarks or advice that you have for all the pre-med students out there?
I think that about does it, man. Just know that you guys can do it. I mean, if I can do it, all of you can do it out there. Just keep working hard, and feel free to reach out to me if I can help in any way. I'm happy to answer any questions that I can. And to you, Will, thanks for having me. This has been absolutely a blast. I love it.
Yeah, no, thank you for joining me, man. I really appreciate it. Definitely reach out to Josh. This guy is awesome. He is just like an incredible, he's an incredible guy. I've actually really enjoyed, getting to know you over the past few months, man. So definitely subscribe to Josh, follow him on Instagram. He has a lot of great, amazing advice. And yeah, thank you all so much for watching. We'll catch you guys in another video.
Thank you all so much for watching this video. It was a ton of fun to make it. I hope that you guys learned something. Feel free to reach out to me, and definitely make sure to go check out Josh's channel. He has an amazing YouTube channel, and he also has an amazing Instagram as well. So go ahead, give him some love. And yeah, if you have any questions, leave them down in the comments below. Make sure to subscribe for more, and we will catch you in another video. Peace.